For 200 years, the meadows of Cataloochee Valley in North Carolina had been shrinking. Not because of drought, not because of disease, because nothing was eating the grass anymore. The open grassland that had defined this valley since before Europeans arrived was filling in, season by season, as forest crept in from the edges and nobody stopped it. The birds that hunt open ground had less open ground to hunt. The clearings that elk herds had maintained for thousands of years, by moving through them, grazing them, disturbing the soil with their hooves, were slowly becoming trees. Because the elk had been gone since around 1800. And meadows, it turns out, don't maintain themselves. In 2001, the National Park Service drove a truck down an 11-mile mountain road and opened a metal crate at the edge of one of those shrinking meadows. 52 elk, that was the plan. 52 animals dropped into a mountain range that had been missing them for 2 centuries to see if it was possible to fix what 200 years of absence had quietly broken. The biologists who released them had run years of studies. They had mapped the vegetation, modeled population growth, written hundreds of pages on what might go wrong. What they had not modeled was what it would look like when an animal extinct in these mountains since before the American Revolution put its head down and started eating. It looked like the most natural thing in the world. No one told the elk what the valley was. No one told them what had been missing from it. No one told them to do any of this. They just ate. And nobody in that field on that September morning could see what was about to happen to that valley. There was a sound missing from these mountains, a sound no living person had ever heard in the Appalachians. That part comes later. So do the bears. The last elk in North Carolina disappeared around 1800, not gradually. The eastern elk populations were hunted out in the span of one human lifetime. The lowlands went first, then the foothills, then the high ridges. By the time John Adams was president, they were gone from the Appalachians entirely. What 200 years of absence actually looks like is harder to describe because it looks like nothing. It looks like a forest that is slightly too uniform, a meadow that is slightly too small, open land that has no obvious reason to be shrinking, but is shrinking anyway, year by year, at a pace so slow that no single person watching it can tell you something is wrong. Cataloochee Valley holds a lot of that silence. Before the national park existed, 1,200 people lived here. Farming families, established since the 1830s. Apple orchards, cornfields, cattle, 2 churches, a schoolhouse, children who knew every ridge by name. In 1934, the federal government acquired the land for Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The families were told to leave. Most of them didn't want to. They went anyway. The buildings stayed. The fields didn't. Without the farmers plowing and grazing, and without the elk that had shaped the meadow system here for thousands of years before them, the open land started closing. The forest crept in from the edges. The old clearings got smaller. By the time the elk arrived in 2001, 67 years of slow re-timbering had been running undisturbed. The Park Service selected Cataloochee precisely because almost nobody went there. The reintroduction needed distance from humans. The elk had to figure out how to be elk without constant interference. What the planners had noted in their paperwork, but perhaps had not fully felt the weight of, was the other large animal already present at high density in these mountains. Great Smoky Mountains National Park has the highest concentration of black bears in the eastern United States, around 1,500 of them in 520 square miles. The elk had no idea. The problem showed up in spring. First calves born in 2002, 10 months after the initial release. Biologist Joe Yarkovich and his team were out in the field with their radio tracking equipment, counting. By June, Most of the calves were dead. A newborn elk calf survives by staying completely still. It lies in tall grass and doesn't move, doesn't make a sound. This is not a learned behavior. It is as hardwired as breathing, refined over hundreds of thousands of years against predators that hunt by sight. Against wolves, it works perfectly. Against mountain lions, it works. Against every predator that shaped elk across North America, stillness is the right answer. Against a black bear following a smell through the grass, it is no answer at all. The elk from Kentucky had never encountered a black bear. Neither had the second group, 27 animals that arrived in 2002 from Elk Island National Park in Alberta. They had no behavioral response to what a bear does, which is move slowly and low with its nose working and not give up. When a bear came toward a calf, the mother ran. The calf went still. The bear walked straight to it. Yarkovich watched an experiment that had taken years of planning fail across a single spring. The herd was breeding. The calves were dying. Net population change, essentially zero. He kept watching because that was the job. You document what happens. You don't intervene unless the whole thing collapses. And because something about what the surviving elk were doing didn't sit right with him. Something had started changing in how the cows behaved right after calving. In year 3, the calves started getting up. Something shifted between year 2 and year 4, and it did not come from any management decision. The calves were getting to their feet within hours of birth, not days. The way elk calves in every Western population do it. Hours. Sometimes less. Yarkovich would find a cow that had calved the previous night standing in the meadow with a calf that was already walking beside her, already trying to keep pace, still visibly unsteady, but up and moving. This should not have been happening. The biology of a newborn elk calf is designed around days of stillness. The legs don't fully support the animal. The coordination isn't there. Western elk biologists, when Yarkovich described what he was seeing, told him he was probably miscounting the days. He wasn't. What he was watching, and he's careful about how he says this, the way people are careful when they've observed something they can describe precisely but cannot fully account for, was a population modifying its own behavior in response to a predator landscape its evolutionary history had never prepared it for. The cows that pushed their calves up early had calves that survived. The cows that didn't lost their calves. A few generations of that, and the behavior started shifting across the herd. This is not the same as genetic change. 20 years is nowhere near enough time for that. This is something faster and stranger. Learned behavior spreading through a population under pressure, changing the expression of instincts that were supposed to be fixed. The bear predation on calves dropped. Not to nothing, but enough. The herd crossed the threshold where births exceeded deaths. And in October of 2010, for the first time in 200 years, a bull elk and rut stood somewhere on the ridgeline above Cataloochee Valley and bugled. That sound carries in mountain terrain. It comes down off the rocks and fills the valley, and there is nothing subtle about it. It is enormous and close, and unlike anything that lives in these mountains today. There was nobody alive who had a memory to attach to it. The cars started appearing in the parking lot before sunrise. Nobody had told anyone to come. The parking area at Cataloochee held 30 cars. Before the elk, that was fine. It was a dead-end road to some preserved farm buildings and a campground that sat mostly empty. The kind of place you'd visit once, appreciate the quiet, and not particularly rush back to. By 2008, people were parking on the gravel road itself, a quarter-mile back from the lot. Wildlife photographers came first, then families who'd seen the photographs, then people who had never visited a national park in their lives, who had driven 4 hours from Charlotte in the pitch dark to be standing in a field when the sun came up. October mornings in Cataloochee smelled of elk musk and cold air and coffee from travel mugs. And a bull would walk to within 20 feet of a parked car, look directly through the windshield at whatever was sitting inside, trying not to breathe, and go back to grazing without any particular interest. The towns nearby had no time to prepare. Maggie Valley, Waynesville, Cherokee, small mountain communities that had been watching their off-season visitor numbers drop for years, found their hotels filling in October. Local guides started running elk viewing tours that left before sunrise. Restaurants added staff for the fall season. Haywood County started tracking the numbers and found that its most remote, most difficult to reach valley had become one of the top wildlife destinations in the eastern United States. None of this was in the reintroduction proposal. Not a word of it. There was no line in any budget for wildlife tourism. No modeling of what happens to a mountain town when a dead meadow comes back to life. The National Park Service posted federal regulations along the Valley Road. Maintain 150 feet from all wildlife at all times. Criminal violation. That October, a bull elk stood in the middle of the road for 11 minutes while 15 cars stacked up behind him. He was not concerned about the regulations. Then the elk left. Nobody expected that either. Young bulls get pushed out of established territory during rut. It happens everywhere elk live. The bigger males hold the meadows. The younger ones move until they find space that isn't already claimed. The difference between Cataloochee and the Rockies is what's on the other side of the ridge. In the Rockies, it's another mountain valley. In Cataloochee, it's a county road and somebody's cornfield. By 2012, elk were turning up regularly outside the park. Not occasionally, regularly. In people's yards in Maggie Valley, on the golf course, in farm fields in Haywood County at 2 in the morning. A mature bull elk in October is 5 feet at the shoulder and weighs 700 pounds and carries a rack of antlers that spans 4 to 5 feet across. When one of them stands in your driveway before sunrise and stares at the house, you don't miss it. You take photographs, and then you post them, and people 3 states away see the photographs and put Maggie Valley on their list of places to drive 4 hours to. Some residents treated the whole situation as extraordinary, which it was. One property owner near the park boundary built a private elk viewing platform and started charging admission. Haywood County integrated it into the tourism marketing. Farmers were less charmed. A field of corn grazed overnight by a group of hungry elk is noticeably shorter in the morning. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission began the process of developing management protocols for elk outside the park. Conversations with farmers about crop damage and deterrence, with county governments about road safety, with conservation groups about acceptable range. It was a reasonable set of conversations to be having. The elk were not party to them. They went where the terrain let them go, and the food was, and the other elk weren't. They had been absent from these mountains for 200 years. Now they were back, and they were spreading, and the mountains that had been missing them were adjusting. Then the storm came. Hurricane Helene came inland from the Gulf Coast in late September 2024 and hit western North Carolina with a force the region had no recent frame of reference for. Roads washed out, bridges gone, homes gone. The death toll across the mountain counties was severe. What made it particularly hard to process, beyond the scale of loss, was how total the destruction felt. How many things that had been permanent suddenly weren't. Cataloochee took direct hits. The access road was destroyed in multiple places. The campground was wrecked. The historic buildings along the Valley Road, the churches and the schoolhouse and the barns that had been standing since before the farming families were forced out in 1934, were damaged. The valley closed. Yarkovich's team couldn't reach the field equipment for weeks. When they got aerial views, the herd was intact. Every elk in the Cataloochee area had moved to higher ground before the flooding peaked. All of them. Not most of them. No warning was issued, no alarm, no management action, no biologist told the elk where to go. Whatever signal moved through the herd before the storm, pressure change, the smell of water coming, some shift in animal behavior around them that registered before the rain started. It was enough. They went up. And they survived. I keep thinking about this. These animals have been in these mountains for 23 years. Their parents weren't here. Their grandparents weren't here. The mountains they live in are mountains their species was absent from for 2 centuries. They have no ancestral memory of this terrain, no inheritance of what to do when the creeks rise. And when the water came, they knew where to go. The valley is still being repaired. The road is under reconstruction. The historic buildings are being assessed and restored where possible. The elk are grazing in the fields above the waterline. Nobody told them where to go. Nobody ever has. In 2001, the meadows of Cataloochee Valley were shrinking. 200 years without the animal that had shaped them, and the grassland was losing ground to the forest, season by season, at a pace so slow that nobody watching could name what was wrong. 52 elk. What came with them? The meadows stopped shrinking. The open ground stayed open. The birds came back to hunt it. A sound returned to mountains that had been silent on that particular frequency for 200 years. A parking lot that held 30 cars started filling before sunrise. Hotels in mountain towns that had been emptying filled up in October. A herd of animals on a ridge in 2024 felt the weather changing and climbed to high ground without being told, and every one of them lived. Nobody in that field in September 2001 saw any of this coming. Nobody ever does. That's the part that gets me every time, and that is what this channel covers. Subscribe if you want one every week. Every story here starts with something that was supposed to be gone forever. Next time, a U.S. state has been dropping fish from airplanes into remote mountain lakes since 1956. Thousands of them. Every summer. They are still doing it today. And what those lakes did with those fish, nobody planned for that either.